Welcome to the virtual presentation. We are so pleased to have Professor Kristen Kling present today. I actually got my first email from Kristen in January of 2014, in which she said she's teaching a first-year seminar in the spring on the psychology of working women. Could we, from the group, send some students her way? And so, of course, we did. Callie is one of the people who went. If you also showed up for one of those panels, please put it in the box. And let's just, I guess, in Zoom style, show your pleasure in your face for her, welcoming her to present.
Thanks.
The floor is yours. I will mute myself.
Take it away. Okay. Ooh, let me see. There's a. Okay. Yes. So, Linda. Yes, I was wondering how long we've known each other. So 6 years. That's a long time. The way we got together was through Lean in Organization. And this is there's the book. I've used that book in teaching several classes, and that book has moved from just a book to a movement now. And for the past 5 years, one of the things they've been doing is they've been collecting data about the questions that are important to understanding women in the workplace. So I initially was asked to go speak at the Hennepin County sort of Women in the Workplace meeting to summarize and share my thoughts about this 2019 report. So that's what I'm going to do now. So take it away, hopefully, here. Okay, I usually like to begin with what I'm gonna say. So today I'll talk about, I'll cover briefly the 3 sections of the Lean In report. I'll tell you about a study of bias and performance evaluations, and this is something that I try to teach everybody I can about. And when we get there, you'll see why I find it to be so important. If there's time, I'd like to tell you about a new idea in psychology about collective intelligence, which is the idea that the question really is, does a group of people have an intelligence that is somehow a unique and emergent quality of that group? And then what are the factors that predict that? And then if you'll indulge me just a moment, hi, Dad.
All right.
There he is on my screen somewhere. So there we go. All right, this is the cover, Women in the Workplace 2019. Again, this is, they've been doing it for 5 years. So they work with McKinsey & Company. You know, they are experts in getting these kinds of surveys done. This year, in particular, 329 companies were part of the study, and they handed over. I hope you can see my cursor. I'll just wave it around a little bit. They got their HR offices to send in data about the positions and who were in their positions in the company. Surveyed 68,500 employees, so that's a very large sample size. So this is a very well-respected and well-done study. Part 1 is called the state of the pipeline, and I get annoyed when I go to a talk and I don't understand something like a metaphor that's being used. So I'm going to explain the pipeline, even though you've probably heard of it before. But it's called a pipeline. It tracks the representation of various groups at all levels in an organization. So why are we using pipeline? Well, it's a useful metaphor because water systems begin with big, large pipes, and then they narrow down, and then when they finally get to you, the pipeline is smaller. And that is like the structure of any workplace, where we have lots of people at the beginning or at the bottom, and then fewer and fewer of them get promoted to the top. So I'll just want to make sure, again, make sure that everybody understands the metaphors I'm talking about. Oh, here we have a cartoon of it. And so this is a study of women in engineering. So they have lots of different surveys they've done. But for example, in grade 10, interest in pursuing a career in engineering is 50-50, male, female. And I'm sorry if you can't read these numbers, mostly just sort of see the pipeline getting smaller. By grade 12, it's now 30-70 in favor of males. First year engineering students are 80% male. And then as the pipeline sort of squeezes tighter and higher, out of PhD graduates in this particular area, again, we had 80% of them were male and 20% were female. So what we're leaking here is women. So they are leaving this career path. So the data I'm going to present first is the pipeline study that's from the 2019 report from the 300 companies. And here's how they've chosen to represent the data. So here are people in the entry level. And here we have people in the highest level of the organization. And I think, nope, I was going to, oops, going to see if I could figure out a way to draw on my slide, and then I messed things up. So I won't do that again. Okay. So they have presented the data here by ethnicity, and they've just broken it out, white versus people of color. So here we have, I'll just read the numbers here, in the entry level, 35%. Oh, and I should mention that these corporations span many, many different disciplines and areas. 35% of the people at the entry level were white men. 16% at the entry level were men of color. 30% white women, and 18% women of color at the entry level. So what we normally look at is comparing the percentage of men or the percentage of women at the entry level to what's going on in the C-suite or in the highest level positions. So we can see that at the beginning of this, across all these companies, there's equity, half men, half women, basically. But as you move up, as the pipeline tightens, more and more women drop out. And then, as we can see, in the C-suite, the highest level positions, 78% men. So the question is, the $24,000 question is, how do we get from 51 to 78? Well, one thing that they highlighted in this report is the big difference between these two numbers. So we have entry level, and then we have the manager position. And what they've noted in their data is that there's a big jump here in the percentage of men. And that's the largest jump at this particular juncture. So we go from 51% men at the entry level to suddenly 62%. And what they want to do is, so here's just a representation of where they want you to focus. And then I turned it on its side to make it look more like a ladder, because that's the metaphor that we do often use, which is climbing up the ladder to get to the glass ceiling. But that's the same, it's the same thing, just presented this way. And so the term that is used is, that they want us to use to describe this as a broken rung. So as you climb the ladder, for women, the difference between this step and that step is broken somehow for women, and that men can get over this hurdle in an easier fashion. So progress at the top is constrained by a broken rung. The biggest obstacle women face on the path to senior leadership is at the first step up to manager. This is important because this can tell us where to focus energies in trying to, minimize the gender bias in the system. So just to point out here, this early inequality has a long-term impact on the talent pipeline. Since men significantly outnumber women at the manager level, there are significantly fewer women to hire or promote to senior managers. And then the number of women decreases at every subsequent level. So here's some more. I like to use pictures a lot. So here we have, we have the entry level. We have men and women trying to climb up. Here's what they would say is the broken rung, preventing women from getting up there. But there's another term I want to make sure that you understand, and that's called the sticky floor. That women get stuck at the bottom of the system as though there's sort of flypaper, and they can't get up over this first rung. So those are two different ways of saying basically the same thing, but the term sticky floor has been around for a little bit longer. So, they conclude here that based on 5 years of data, so this is cutting across all of their surveys, employing more than 22 million people, despite progress at senior levels, women remain significantly underrepresented. And the newer thing they're saying is that a broken rung at the step up to manager is the biggest obstacle that women face on the path to leadership. So what do we do about it? First thing to do is to make public your goals about getting women into these positions. So set well-publicized goals for getting more women into this first level management. Be sure that the slates for hiring and promotion are as diverse as possible. Put evaluators through unconscious bias training. So unconscious bias is, it's a way that we might be prejudiced that we are unaware of in our conscious minds. And especially in moments when things are ambiguous or quick, we will rely on using this non-conscious or unconscious thought. And this is, very important right now as we're evaluating police brutality. And it's specifically important when we talk about whether you want to explain police brutality as some bad apples or some sort of systemic problem. And this unconscious bias work suggests that it's not just one or two people, it's a part of the system. And these unconscious biases are things that we all grow up with, we all pretty much share, and they're pretty resistant to attempts to change them. So, but you can teach people to at least know about them. And if you know about your unconscious biases, then you can use the front part of your brain to try to counteract what this back part of your brain is telling you. So we're going to be hearing a lot about this, and I suspect that some of these reforms to policing is going to involve work like this. This is establish clear criteria. The more you can eliminate ambiguity, the less people will use stereotypes when making their decisions. Put more women in line for the step up to manager. So make more time available, more money to put women in these leadership trainings, so they can begin to think of themselves as being in a management position. So those are the suggestions for how to fix the pipeline. Culture of work. So this is part 2 of the report. To reach true equality, changing the numbers is not enough. Companies also need to invest in creating a strong culture. This means putting 3 important foundational elements in place. Equal opportunity and fairness. So they did in this survey ask people what their perception of fairness and opportunity was at their company. Number 2 is work-life flexibility. And number 3 is safe and respectful workplace. I'm going to make an important point here, and it's a little bit sneaky. So In my opinion, some of the best ways to help women are going to look like this, and it's going to involve that work-life balance. If companies make it easier for everyone to balance work-life conflicts, it's going to benefit women more, because women are more likely to do the majority of housework and caregiving. So you're going to have a hard time in these companies changing policies for women only, because then the people who are not getting the benefits of those changes or extra time or whatever, they're going to say, well, why not? Why don't I get it? But if you can come up with something that you can give to everyone, but it helps women better, well, then you're going to have an easier time of it. So here I have a question, and I'd like you to think about this. What would you do with your extra time if cleaning and meal preparation were done for you every day? I'm leaving time for laughter. So I'm actually going to tell you now about, you can't see some of that, I'm sorry, but I'm going to tell you now about companies that are providing benefits that involve cleaning and meal preparation. Phil Laban, chief executive of Evernote, turned to his wife last year and asked if she had suggestions for how the software company might improve the lives of its employees and their families. His wife, who also works at Evernote, didn't miss a beat. House cleaning, she said. Today, Evernote's 250 employees have their homes cleaned twice a month for free. Other things that companies are doing. In Silicon Valley, Facebook was giving spending money to new parents. The School of Medicine was providing doctors with house cleaning and in-home dinner delivery. And then, I think there's some more here. Right, so this says a workplace was built on the assumption that there was somebody at home dealing with the home front. And I'm going to return to that in a moment. Okay, so, right. So I just wanted to get to this one. Facebook has also made it that you can, at the end of this workday, take home a free dinner that they cook there for you. And other companies are opening up the, oh yeah, there it is, opening up the cafeterias at the end of the workday. So a family could have their family dinner in the company cafeteria. So again, these are cultural issues, and I think they're important because you can, again, you can make the benefit available to everyone, but it's going to benefit women more than others. And so here's this guy here who's had his apartment cleaned courtesy of his employer, Evernote. So that is one kind of cultural shift where the businesses are thinking more about family and work and how to balance them. Okay, so this is another question for you. If you don't have paid help for help with kids in a household, who helps you? Well, in some cases, it's a spouse or a domestic partner. And then I'll just have to pretend here. How many of you live in a home with 2 adults? So raise your hand. Thanks, Linda. Oh, thanks, Dad. And then raise your hand if both partners are working. What I want to talk about now is the gender difference in having a stay-at-home spouse. Oh, thanks, Cindy. That's cool. This is data based off the 68,000 self-report surveys. And what they report is that across all of them, only 19% of women have a stay-at-home spouse or partner, compared to 44% of men. So women are less likely to have help with the home front, which is that cooking and cleaning that I talked about. And this disparity gets larger at senior levels. So I just put the text over there, but over here, only 29% of women who have a senior level job have a stay-at-home spouse, compared to 63% of the men. So when we're talking about a culture trying to balance family and work, you can see how men would have an advantage. Right, so this is just to reiterate, the culture should have equal opportunity and fairness, should focus on work-life flexibility, safe, respectful workplace, and then the one I'm sort of unofficially adding is put benefits in place that are available to all, because that will help you with your, the idea that you're being fair, but benefit women more. Commitment to diversity, this they didn't spend too much time on in the report, but over the years they have been asking the HR people questions like, do you set gender diversity targets for employee representation? And over the years of the study, they didn't ask this question in 2016 or 2017, but about a third of the companies are reporting that they're doing that. Share at least some diversity metrics with all employees. So not too much change over time. Looks like about half the companies are doing that. Here's one that I think is very important. Hold senior leaders accountable for progress on gender diversity metrics. And that number does seem to be going up. So, it's nice to have targets, but it's only when you make somebody accountable with that you're going to really probably get to those targets. And again, have financial incentives in place for senior leaders who meet diversity metrics. That number seems to be going down, but let's say about a fifth of the companies are doing that. I want to get back to the pipeline for a moment. Again, this is just, I wanted to show you that, remind you again that at every step we have more women falling out of the pipeline. And now the question I want to talk about is why. So I'm in psychology, my training is in psychology, so psychologists study bias against women as an explanation. And there are many kinds of bias. I don't have time to talk about all of these, but I just wanted to highlight the fact that I know there's other kinds of bias that's out there. I'm going to focus on just one of them, and by doing that, I'm not saying that the one I'm focusing on is more important than the others. I just wanted to make that clear. So attribution bias. We see women as less competent than men. We tend to give them less credit for accomplishments and blame them more for mistakes. So that is, how do we attribute the success of males versus females? Affinity bias. This is, we gravitate towards people like ourselves in appearance, beliefs, and backgrounds. And we may avoid or even dislike people who are different from us. Maternal bias, yes, I could talk about this without taking an entire another section, but motherhood triggers false assumptions that women are less committed to their careers and even less competent. I could talk about that, but not going to. Double discrimination and intersectionality. Again, another thing I want to say is I study gender, but I don't think that's the only or most important difference. So bias isn't limited to gender. Women can also experience biases due to their race, sexual orientation, a disability, or other aspects of their identity. Gender interests me most. That's why I studied it. But there are many other kinds of biases that are out there. And if you are a member of more than one, then you'll be experiencing what's called double discrimination. Performance bias. So this is how we tend to underestimate women's performance and overestimate men's. And this is what I'm going to talk about for the rest. For the rest of the talk. So again, There are many other kinds of bias, but this is the one I want to talk about. And again, now I'm going to do a little audience participation, but you're not in front of me, so I'll just imagine. How many of you have had a job or been with the same company for more than a year? I'm going to guess lots of hands. Okay, thank you. More than a decade, anyone? Okay. How many of you have been evaluated at your job at least once? More than 5 times? More than 10? Well, now the question I'm going to ask you is, what happens if, let me press a button here. Let's say that this is a job of performance evaluation and he's the evaluator and she's our employee. What if he has the thought, I've never really thought that women can do this job as well as men. So let's say that this is something that he thinks. Well, at his the first evaluation he completes, he's going to give her a slightly lower rating than a male employee that has the same, actual performance. So just biased a little bit against women. At the second evaluation, you can tell us the second one because I gave her a haircut. He gives her a slightly lower rating than the male employees again. She didn't like the haircut, so at her third evaluation, he gives her a slightly lower rating than the male employees again and again. And now she's getting a little bit older. Now we have that slightly lower rating again and again and again. Oh, more gray hairs. Again, again, and again, and again. And sixth evaluation, he's still giving her slightly lower evaluations than the men that he evaluates. Oh, she's even older there. So these evaluations that are even just slightly more negative than those that are given to males can have a large cumulative negative impact on women as a group. So this is the main point I want you to remember. Sometimes I have arguments with people and they're like, well, even if but there's bias, it's just small. It's a small bias. But the argument I'm going to make to you is that small biases can have important and large consequences in certain conditions, and I'll tell you about those conditions in a moment. I did want you to kind of think for a moment about how our fictional female employee might feel. This pattern of slightly lower evaluations could lead to lower pay, possibly frustration, and possibly leaving the field or dropping out of the pipeline. I also wanted to just remind you, the story I've told you involves sexism, but the story would be the same for any other kind of bias. And so another kind of person sitting here with a different kind of difference. So I told you this already. It seems intuitive that these small incidences of bias can accumulate to a large influence. And I can say that, and we can all nod our heads, but the neat thing about psychology and science is that I can prove it to you. So that's what I'm going to do next. And so this is a study about performance evaluations. We do know that women are evaluated more negatively in the workplace. And Virginia Villain says women carry an implicit negative sign in the workplace. The easiest way we demonstrate this is we send the same resume out to people who are hiring, and we have the same resume for a male and a female, and the only thing we change is the name. So if you send out 2 applications for anything and all of the qualifications are the same, people will prefer the one with a male name over the female name. And this has been shown, unfortunately, it's been shown for decades. So it is true that women carry this implicit negative sign in the workplace. These are the researchers who ran the study. It's called the Monte Carlo study, and I usually teach this topic to college students, and then I say, what's what is Monte Carlo famous for? And they have absolutely no idea. But I'm sure if I asked you, you guys would know it has something to do with gambling or numbers, or in this case, probability. And what they're going to do is present us with a computer simulation of a workplace. So importantly, when I move on from this slide, I'm not talking about real people. I'm talking about actually literally lines on an Excel spreadsheet that are made up people. Right, so I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a moment. Let's see. Okay. To model the workplace, there are two assumptions. And one of them is called the pyramid structure of a company. And all that means is that there's fewer people in the higher level positions and more in the bottom. So that's the pyramid structure. So that is one of the parameters of this model. And the second parameter is something called the tournament model. And at this point, with all my college students, I say, how many of you have been in a tournament? And lots of them raise their hands. And I say, you know, if you lose your first game, what happens? I say, I go home. So a tournament model means that later success depends on early success. So you can't reach those higher levels of the pyramid unless you've made it over each of those hurdles. And I just, for fun, put up the, the NCAA bracket. If you lose out here, you can't make it to the top. So we've got those two parameters in place. And the first thing they did is they created virtual employees. So they just made up a bunch of people, and they made half of the people male and half of the people female. But these are virtual employees. Then what they did is they randomly assigned each of those persons a job evaluation score, but then they introduced some bias into the system. So for all of the virtual people who were males, they kind of went boop and gave them a teeny bump up on their performance evaluations. And all of those virtual employees who were female, they went boop and they went down. They had their evaluations made lower, subtracted. The model that they created had a very small bias against women. So the amount of bias explained 1% of the variability among all the scores. So really small. Then they sort of let these virtual employees loose, and they iterated and they promoted virtual employees until all of those positions were filled with new employees. There were 8 levels, and just, here it is, they were, this doesn't have 8, but, I mean, doesn't, yes, but anyway, there were 500 employees at the lowest level, so 500 people were always in the lowest level, and they iterated the model till 10 virtual people were promoted to the highest level. And I'm going to unfold this graph for you, but these are the results under the condition of minimal or 1% bias against women. The yellow line represents the percentage of women in the various levels of this company. And in the lowest level, 53% of the workers were women. So not too much of a gender difference in the lowest level and then the next one and the next one. But when we look at the highest levels in the company, only 35% of the employees at the top of our pyramid were female. At this point, I'd say, does everybody understand? And I'll just assume you're all nodding your head yes. So thank you. I took out the middle numbers here just to show you again. In a model where we have a very small percentage of bias, There are more women represented at the bottom level, so that's the sticky floor, and many more men at the top in those top positions. So I just wanted to compare this back to the lean-in numbers. So the lean-in numbers had 48% women in the entry level, and 22% women in what they call the C-suite, and then the numbers that I just showed you based on a simulation are 53% and 35%. So what the computer model does mirror what we find out there in the world. It's 7 o'clock, so okay, let's see. This is, again, only 35% of the virtual female employees make it to the top. When small effects compound over time, and what I'm focusing on here is small amounts of bias against women, the impact can be large. And it is under certain circumstances, and it's under circumstances where you are repeatedly assessed, and when there are very few positions at the top. And again, even small amounts of gender bias can have serious implications for women in the workplace. And I think, yes, so, yep, this is one of the reasons that women have such a hard time making it to the top. And yeah, I think in order to, you know, keep an eye on time, that's where I'll stop.
Wow. Thank you very much. I enjoyed it just as much as the last time. Really useful.
Thank you, Linda.
Yeah. So I know some people sent in questions in advance. Did you incorporate some of those answers in what you said today?
If I can open up my, I think I can, wait a minute, let me stop sharing for a moment and open up that file. You know, one of the questions is how can I be a best ally to women in these circumstances? And the report, which I'm happy to, you know, and it's probably, Linda has a link to it as well. There's all of those steps at the beginning, which is to make sure you always have a diverse, you know, try to get as a diverse pool as possible for any sort of selection process to make things less ambiguous, because as human beings, whenever there's ambiguity, we rely on our cognitive shortcuts, which are stereotypes. But I think that making senior leaders accountable is going to be the #1 way to help. And, you know, how would you do that? Well, you would gather information on everybody who makes these decisions about hiring and promotion. And then you would just do some statistics and say, hey, we've noticed the last 100 times you evaluated employees, the average for the women was slightly lower than the average for men, or whatever difference there might be. And it could very well be that there are people who are having these unconscious biases and they don't know it. So by just hopefully telling them about it, you can have them act to minimize it. And if you have that data, you can also statistically correct for that bias. So if you know, oh, hey, we have a person out there who's always giving women slightly lower evaluations, well, we'll just, you know, give those women a few points back on their evaluations. So there's lots of things that you can do. Let me see. Another question was how to get women to speak up more. And that, boy, for that, I mean, we need more women to model that kind of behavior, and we need more women to be models in these higher levels in an organization. I think that'll give women the courage to speak out and believe that their opinion matters, so that they do have the qualities they need to get to the top. But I hate to say it, I'm a little pessimistic about how to get that line, which was going like that, how to make it more approach equity. Because remember, I was only talking about one kind of bias. And at the beginning, I talked about 4 or maybe 5. So I can show you that bias in the performance evaluations can have a strong impact, but bias, you know, against moms, for example, It's huge. And psychology can measure it, the size of these biases, and suggest ways to fix it. But, you know, I think probably an important thing is just telling people about all of these findings.
Mhm.
For so long, they've really just gone sort of under the radar.
That's great. I do want to get a chance to connect with people. So I'm going to stop the recording again.